Okay, guys. Hey, good afternoon. Hi, Ashley, and to all the rest that are going to shortly arrive. Welcome back. It's about 12:56, so we do have 3.5 minutes or so until we get the class underway. But I hope you guys had a good weekend and ready to take some notes on a new chapter in the book for today's meeting. Welcome back. And yeah, we should be good to go in about 3 minutes. Hi, Margarito, and hi, Chelsea. Hey, Dylan. Good to see everybody. Hi, Danny. Hey, Danny. Both Dannys. Hello, hello. Hi, Noah. Okay. Just taking a few minutes until we get to 1 p.m. Hey, Nick. Hannah, good to see you. Edward, welcome back. Avani, nice, good to see you. And Mick, welcome back to you too. Just a couple minutes here. Hi, Sunny. Hey, Nancy. Brenda. All the critical thinkers, welcome back. Hey, Alexa. Amanda, good to see you too. Amanda, Emily, everyone here, thanks so much for your attendance. Hi, Vanessa, Harry. Hope you guys are having a good start to your week. And hi there, Rhubarb, Stacy, everyone else. Hi, welcome back. So it's pretty much 1 o'clock now. I'm going to let us get underway. Welcome back to Critical Thinking again. So as you've been following the calendar of dates, if you keep track of the syllabus, we're right on track. We just finished our first quiz last Wednesday, and I'm finishing the grading of that. It should be ready this week. So I'll let you know as soon as it's done. And once it's done, I'll send out a big class announcement to notify you that you can check for your grade. And maybe I'll also provide a basic answer key so that you have a sense of what the kind of correct information would have been. But yeah, that's what we just finished, the first quiz. The previous homework that you turned in the prior week, you would notice in my titanium announcements sent to you last week, we didn't have a meeting last Monday, obviously, because of President's Day. But around that time, I think Sunday night, I let you guys know that I was done with it and that I gave you the answer key, and that anyone who wants their score, just please email me. That's how I like to do it, just so everyone knows. I like to receive a personal email, and then I give a personal response back when it comes to you checking on your grades. That's just sort of a little mechanism that I think is good because it helps to promote you guys, motivate you to engage with your professor and to have a little bit of correspondence going. So yeah, anybody who is still curious about the grade of the first homework, you can email me anytime. I think I've answered maybe 20 or 30 emails, but there are more members of the class, so just know those grades are ready for you whenever you want. Do give me like a 24 to 48 hour maximum to reply to any student messages. But I've cleared my inbox queue as of this morning, just a little while ago, about 11:30 a.m. So, you know, every day I try to clear the inbox, and therefore if I get more requests for any student grades on any of the first assignment, then I'm happy to answer those this week. You can also, I guess, check back after I notify you that the first quiz is done, and you can get both grades at the same time, but it's totally up to you. I'm just letting you know those first assignments. I graded the first homework. I'm working on the first quiz. Grades for the first homework are available per request through email, and the second assignment, first quiz, I'm finishing up with that in the next few days, and I'll be in touch with you as soon as it's ready. So, cool. And yeah, as usual, please do note your attendance by just commenting whatever you want in the chat. It's great to see everybody here, and I hope you're all having a nice last couple weeks of winter. We're almost down to the spring now, even though I guess this is spring semester. But I always like the change of weather, personally, me. So now today we're going to move to another chapter of the book. So we've covered already material from chapter 8, just a little in chapter 7 that talked about induction, and then we spent plenty of time on chapter 1, which was all about the basic qualities of a critical thinker, what are some of the famous social psychology experiments that give insight into the topic, and what are some of the obstacles to it, stages of cognitive development, stages of the critical thinking process, and all of that. So now, after finishing those first 4 weeks of class, we move to chapter 3, and that's our topic now. Chapter 3 is all about language and communication. So we have 2 meetings this week on chapter 3, today and Wednesday. And then next week it'll be chapter 4, which has to do with knowledge and what are the requirements for somebody to have knowledge, and what are the barriers and cognitive mistakes and errors that we can make when we try to process information. So chapter 3 and 4, those are the next 2 chapters. 2 lectures on chapter 3 this week, 2 lectures on chapter 4 next week. And then after that, we'll be getting into our preparation for the midterm during week 6. Sorry, this is week 5. Next week is week 6. During week 7, we have a midterm review session on March the 8th, and then the midterm exam itself is on March 10th. So the next thing that you guys have to do in the class basically is take the midterm on the 10th of March. That's a couple weeks out, and we have to cover chapter 3 and 4 in between now and then. So that's kind of the game plan for the next few weeks of class. And that's all in the calendar of dates on the schedule and the syllabus, but just so that everybody's clear and we're all on the same page. Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about chapter 3, but there's just this one leftover vocabulary item from the previous material, chapter 1, and I didn't want to leave this behind because I noticed that I guess it didn't get covered, and so it's an eligible piece of vocabulary for like future quizzes or tests. But now this is not chapter 3 stuff yet, so just forget the header. But one last definition or concept from chapter 1. When I talk to you guys about barriers to critical thinking, what are some of the obstacles, mental habits that get in the way of being a better critical thinker? One more of them, just to add to the list, is confirmation bias. I think some people already know what confirmation bias is, having perhaps learned about the idea elsewhere, but it's also mentioned in our book and it's in this class, so I want to make sure everyone's got this definition in mind. Confirmation bias is basically when you only seek out information that confirms what you already believe. So it's kind of like a biased way of seeking confirmation for your views, going out into the world and selectively looking at information and evidence so that it all seems like it reinforces what you already believe. So I kind of think of confirmation bias in a way, it's the logical corollary to avoidance. With avoidance, which we did talk about, a person tries to avoid people and information that differs from what they believe. So like you try and not engage with people that have different opinions, and not to look at information that would tend to clash with or conflict with what you think. Confirmation bias has to do with the seeking of information rather than the avoiding of it, but it's a very similar phenomenon. In this case, you selectively seek out information, but only the stuff that that aligns with what you already think is the case. So like, for example, suppose there's a person who believes in the flat earth idea, which I'm hoping none of us would ever believe in this, but you know, there's some people out there. So suppose there's someone that thinks the earth is flat. Now, if they have confirmation bias, right? Question for you here in the chat, if you're following the definition and the explanation. If someone has confirmation bias, they believe the earth is flat, then where do you think this person would go, like on the internet and stuff, if they were trying to seek out information concerning the question, is the earth flat or is it not flat? Like, so if someone's got confirmation bias, they already think so, they think that it is, then in terms of like going on a search engine and looking for stuff, what kind of websites would these people be going to give them some kind of evidence about this topic? What do you think? Okay, so Danny, sometimes these comments pop up on my phone faster than they do on the laptop, but you say they would only look for information that that proves the earth is flat. Well, I'd hesitate to say prove, because proof would mean that it can be proven, but rather, yeah, they would only look at information that's given by people that are already advocates of this idea. So like, you know, flatearth.com, or they would go to like blogs and websites on Reddit or something where there's a community of people that already think this is true, and filter out all the evidence that doesn't say the same thing. So yeah, when you've got confirmation bias, you sometimes want to shore up your beliefs, but you only look at information that agrees with you. So like, I don't know, if a person like has a really hardcore position in favor of a certain kind of governmental policy, then they might only study documents and research that verifies what they think is true, you know? When you really do real research that's honest, that's not biased, then you have to look at all sides of the question and take your opinion from the wealth of evidence that exists concerning the issue. So you can't just sort of selectively limit yourself to the information that agrees with what you already think. Like as if a person only goes to friendly media sources that agree with their established opinions. This confirmation bias thing is, I think, an epidemic problem, much more now in this current day than probably ever in history before. Because think about it, right? If you guys had grown up generations ago, like imagine the life of your grandparents, for example, when they were young. They didn't have the internet, and so they didn't have the ability to like go out and find friendly sources of information that confirmed what they happened to think if they had views that were outside of the scientific consensus or the mainstream, right? Back then, we pretty much all consumed the same diet of information. But now that everybody has, you know, a web browser and access to the internet, people can selectively investigate things, but limit themselves to information that establishes and reinforces what they already think is true. So you couldn't have done that. You couldn't have just gone to like flatearth.com and found like a community of like-minded people in like the year 1950. You would have had to just research whatever scientific evidence exists in like class textbooks and in the academy, and you would have had an informed opinion based on that. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, it's a great thing that we have the internet and we have all this information right at our fingertips, but it puts it a little more on us to be open-minded, objective, and impartial in the way we seek out information, because people can certainly tailor their diet of information today to confirm whatever it is they think is true. So you got people going to certain corners of the internet where other people will say, I agree with you, and they never expose themselves to contrary evidence or opinion. So that's just one more thing to remember. That was located in chapter 1, confirmation bias, okay? Only seeking out information that confirms what you already think. It's a bias in favor of confirming your own views. That's why it's called confirmation bias, okay? And Noah, you say Wikipedia. I don't know. I mean, you probably wouldn't go on Wikipedia because Wikipedia, at least, it's crowdsourced information, but for the most part, it's usually reliable. You'd have to go somewhere where I think you might have to dig a little bit deeper into the web to find like websites and blogs and people who post things that say that the earth is definitely flat. But of course, on Wikipedia, you'd at least probably be able to learn about the history of the flat earthers and stuff. I don't think they would promote the idea itself, though. Okay, so now we're on to chapter 3, language and communication. So to start the chapter, the book opens up with a little reference to some recent American political history from the year 2012. It goes into the case of this whole Benghazi scandal. I don't know if any of you guys have heard about that, or if you have any kind of prior knowledge of the whole case of Benghazi. If you do, you can let me know in the chat whether you've heard about it or not, just to get a sense of where your current knowledge is. But I'm going to tell you about it anyway, and it is in the book. So in 2012, September 11th, 2012, actually, kind of an ironic coincidence. It was on the same date, of course, as the old terrorist attacks from '01. But in 2012, basically, Barack Obama was running for re-election against Mitt Romney. And so we had a presidential election year of 2012. At that time, there were a lot of like revolutionary movements happening in the Middle East and in parts of the Muslim world. Like there were long-standing dictatorial autocratic regimes that were starting to fall because of public protest and public organization. People were marching in the streets saying, you know, we want to remove these long-standing dictators that have held on to power for 30 years or something. We want democratic reforms. And so in country after country, we started to see some of these old, you know, heads of state toppled over. Like in Egypt, there was a movement to remove the then president. And then in Libya, there had been a long-time military dictatorship that had been ruled by a guy named Muammar Gaddafi. So Gaddafi was like the dictator of Libya. And this wave of opposition and protest that had arisen in the streets in parts of the Muslim world was coined the Arab Spring by some commentators and political writers. That it was the Arab Spring, this dawn of a new day, like when democratic reforms will become established in these parts of the world where democracy didn't have a strong foothold before. So the United States wanted to stand with the protesters that were trying to topple some of these undemocratic regimes. In Libya, the protest movements became so big and popular in the streets that the dictator Gaddafi was starting to become concerned that he was going to lose his grip on power, and he was starting to threaten to use full military force to crush these protesters. So he was saying that, you know, he would go in with airstrikes basically, and you have thousands of people marching in the streets, just, you know, bomb them from the air, which would have been a humanitarian catastrophe, obviously. So the United States, together with some of our allies, decided that we were going to prevent Gaddafi from making good on these threats. So a coalition of forces, Western allies, together with the U.S., launched an air bombing campaign to stop Gaddafi's undemocratic assault on his own people. And that basically led to the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya. This gave the resistance movement against him enough leverage and space to actually seize him, and he was basically killed by this angry mob. Okay, so then Libya's dictator is out, and even though I guess in one sense that's removing a long-standing autocratic leader, it also created a kind of vacuum of power. So in that immediate aftermath of Gaddafi being toppled, there's a lot of chaos and instability in Libya as they try to establish a new government and a new head of state. So the United States has embassies all around the world. That's where our diplomatic personnel engage in diplomacy with other countries and try to manage our agreements that we have with various different stakeholders around the world. So we have an embassy in Libya, and it was in Benghazi, right? So that's the U.S. consulate in Libya, Benghazi, Libya. Well, so keep in mind the context that I gave you. There's political instability, unrest, the recent removal of a leader there. Now, around the same time, okay, a film had been produced in the United States. And this film was made not by the United States. It had nothing to do with the US government or really the American people, but an American independent filmmaker, someone in, I think, Hollywood, but just an independent filmmaker, made a movie. And this movie was like a harsh takedown of the religious figure of a Prophet Muhammad, of the religion of Islam. So, you know, in the film, he was depicted as like a warlord and abusive person and all this other stuff, right? So it's basically disrespectful to the Prophet Muhammad, who is a highly revered religious figure in Islam. And knowing a little bit about some of the cultural traditions of of the Islamic faith, it's considered really, really heretical to attack the prophet. It would be like saying bad things about Jesus Christ to a Christian, right? But, you know, perhaps even greater offense, you know, given the lack of, in some parts of the world of like freedom of speech and other kind of democratic principles. So people were mad basically throughout the Muslim world at the existence of this film. And they were starting to protest and encircle U.S. embassies in various countries, including at our consulate in Benghazi. Now, there was a little bit of a debate in the political circles of leadership at the time in the United States. Some people were saying, how shall we characterize these protests? Shall we say that these are people that are just aggrieved at an offensive film and kind of apologize for the existence of the film? So to take a conciliatory stance, distance the United States from the film and say it has nothing to do with us and we're sorry about it, kind of. Other people said, no, take a bit more of an aggressive messaging posture, because maybe in some of these cases, these look like peaceful protesters, but what they're really going to do is overthrow our diplomatic embassies and maybe hurt people or kill them. So there's kind of a debate. Do we characterize the people protesting as just peaceful protesters legitimately upset at this film, or rather as radicals that were plotting to wage an attack against one of our embassies? Under the leadership we had then with President Obama and the Secretary of State was at that time Hillary Clinton, the decision was to try and de-escalate, and instead of, you know, saying this is dangerous and let's fortify our buildings, to say the film was wrong, it has nothing to do with the United States, and basically these are peaceful protesters. Okay, so what ended up happening was in Benghazi, as some had predicted, the protesters that had encircled the embassy did end up waging a violent assault on the embassy. And this led to the death of at least a handful of US diplomatic personnel over there. So this became the so-called Benghazi scandal, right? And at the time, it was a political hot potato. Some Republican members of our government were saying that they blamed Obama and the State Department for not taking better messaging and communication posture, like telling everybody this is dangerous, maybe there's going to be an attack launched, and we should reinforce our embassies and send additional evacuation supplies and security forces. So in our book, they mentioned this as one case where a failure of communication kind of led to a disastrous result. Now, I think a little bit, maybe too much has been made of the Benghazi scandal in a way, because people take it too far. Some people, you know, go into conspiratorial mode and say, oh, well, there was an attempt to shield from accountability the protesters, and maybe there were loyalties that were not fully allegiant to the United States or something. But nothing like that is really true. Nonetheless, it does teach us a little lesson, right? That sometimes when lots of things are on the line, life, death, property, liberty, then it really matters a lot the quality of your communication when there's high stakes. In this case, the miscommunication resulted in there being a shortage of room for evacuated casualties and also lack of preparedness in case hostilities came to pass. And the general official line that protests rather than the terrorism caused the unrest contributed to the lack of preparedness. So it's just a sort of recent event in US political history that is mentioned in the book to kind of bring the reader and the student into an awareness of how important it sometimes is for us to have timely, effective, and accurate communication. So we're going to go into all the details of what good communication involves now with this as our kind of setup. So good communication skills involve keeping a dialogue open, being clear, timely, and accurate in the things that you're either saying or writing. So in these lectures, we're going to review important aspects of language, the relation that it has to being a good critical thinker. We'll talk about what language is, how language can shape our views, what are some different functions of language. We'll learn about what are some different types of definitions. And we'll also distinguish what are some different communication styles. And we'll talk at the end about how language and rhetoric can sometimes be used to manipulate people or to shape their viewpoint in a way that's not just an appeal to reason. Okay, so let's go into it then. What first of all we need to know is, what is language itself? So language it's fascinating to be a human being because we have language, right? We're unique among all life forms because of the existence of our ability to speak and communicate in language. If I tell you right now, imagine a purple cow standing on the moon. In your mind, you've got the image. It's not like it just happens automatically because you understand what these words mean. But there's no set of sounds or symbols that I could show any non-human animal that would induce that mental image in their mind because they don't have stable symbolism that stands for things, right? Animals can grunt and they can cry and they can express and communicate in some very primordial basic sense, but they cannot put forward abstract content through the use of symbols. So they don't know anything about what happened in the past, what's going on in space. They don't know anything about the composition of periodic table or the nature of the scales in music. So there's a lot of things that you just can't understand or at least fully grasp unless you have the more advanced form of language that human beings have. So it's really kind of what makes us the special life form that we are. You know, what divides us and makes us, I would say, a greater life form than the lower animals is our possession of language and higher thought. So here's what it is. Language is a system of communication that involves symbols. And the symbols can be of three kinds. So let me write that here. Okay, so language, there's the definition. It is a system of communication. So obviously we use this to communicate information from one person or from one party to another. And it involves symbols, and the symbols of language can be of three particular kinds. So one way of communicating in language is to speak using spoken sounds, like I'm speaking to you right now. Obviously, we can also write, and that's another form of linguistic communication. You see the symbols here on the board, these letters that form words. They convey content, they convey information to you, but that's not by hearing a sound, it's by seeing an image on the board in this case, or on the page if it were in a book, or on the screen if you're using, you know, one of your devices. Also, sometimes language can be communication that involve nonverbal symbols, and that is like, for example, sign language and all that stuff, and also body language and gestures and tone of voice. So one interesting thing to point out about the symbols that are used in language is that they're totally arbitrary and conventional, meaning that we could have really decided that any set of symbols stands for the same ideas and concepts. It just happens that the sounds and symbols that we've arrived at are the ones that function in our language. Like, so for example, if I say the word dog, you can imagine being the kind of animal that I'm talking about. That's the English sound that we use, of course, to refer to that type of species. If I say perro, right? This is dog, but it's in Spanish. It's a different sound, but the two different sounds refer to the same exact thing, like hello, English greeting, hola, Spanish equivalent of the same. They have difference of sound, but they mean the same thing. And so imagine if the world had developed differently, we could have had a completely foreign set, a completely alien and different set of sounds that could have been the sounds used to convey the same information. Okay, so you don't even really have to think about this weird counterfactual course of human history. You can just look around the world and see the various world languages and understand that the same content can easily be conveyed in any number of different sounds as long as there's a rule established and a convention which says this sound means this thing, okay? Same with the written symbols that are used in language. These are obviously English words written in our alphabet and using our spelling. But if we were looking at Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, you know, any other number of world languages, the symbols would be far different, but we could have the same exact lecture on the same material. As you guys know, many languages exist with different surface forms, different sounds, different inscriptions, but the same would be communicated in any of those different ways. Nonverbal signs, right? We said here, sign language. is, for example, a system of language that communicates things, but it's not done by means of sounds, because of course people typically that are deaf are those that master sign language. And it's also, of course, not communicated by means of written symbols. So that's another way to communicate using language without sound or without a written inscription. So human language is social, meaning that we're born into it. We're born into the language of our native tongue, right? You grow up in a community where you just kind of learn this language through your early childhood experiences with your parents and the members of your community. And language, of course, is what transmits tradition and culture from one generation down to the next. Like, why is it that we know all the stories of our founding fathers and of, I don't know, like Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492? The only way we know these things is because of documents, teachings, writings that survive from one era into the next. If we lost touch with those things, then we would lose our ability to know our history or anyone's history. So language is a major aspect of human life and the human condition. Now, there are thousands of languages around the world. Some people debate whether or not these different languages have a common grammar structure. One very famous linguist and political theorist is Noam Chomsky. Maybe some of you have ever heard of him or seen him speak. He's still alive. He's a very interesting guy. But anyway, he had this position in linguistics, which was his first real academic work, called universal grammar. He believed that behind all the surface differences that the various languages of the world have, there's a kind of common grammar structure, like subject, predicate, the same kind of overall grammar he thinks exists in all languages. Not everybody agrees with Chomsky's view, although I think it is the more dominant position in the field of linguistics. Some people basically point to like highly atypical indigenous languages in like isolated native cultures, which don't seem to obey the common grammar of many other world languages. For example, in some places, you go really deep, like into the Amazon forest and stuff, there could be tribal cultures where the numbering system doesn't go beyond just a couple of numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then just many after that. Anyway, whether we think that there's universal grammar or there are particular differences among the various languages, being a human being essentially involves being able to communicate and convey content one to another through language in all its various forms. Okay, so now what we're going to speak about are the functions of language. The textbook goes over this. What can language basically be used for, or what can it do for us? So what are functions of language? The textbook mentions 4 of them. Okay, so here we go. Functions of language. Okay, so language can be used to achieve any of these various functions. Here are 4 major ones. One is the informative function of language. So the informative function of language is simply to make statements that are either true or false. So to issue statements or to say or write things that have a truth value. So when we first started the class, we talked a little bit about different types of sentences, and that information comes back to play a little bit right now, because the informative function of language has to do with the use of assertoric sentences. So whenever you are claiming or stating something to be the case, that is the informative function of language. And so, like if I tell you we have a midterm on, let's see, what would that be? March the 10th, Wednesday, March the 10th. If I tell you we have a midterm Wednesday, March the 10th, that's just me giving you information. In that case, it's true. If I tell you that, I don't know, the capital of California is Los Angeles, that's not true. That's incorrect because it's Sacramento. But I could say something false. So when I'm passing along information, whether I'm passing along correct or incorrect information, that's still within the realm of the informative function of language. Sometimes, of course, we pass along false information unintentionally because we ourselves are misinformed, right? You heard something from someone or some source, you thought it was that information to someone else, but it actually wasn't really correct. In other cases, of course, we may intend to manipulate people's views by deliberately saying something false, which would be to deceive them. We'll talk a little bit about deception at the end of this chapter. But for the most part, we hope that people are good and honest and just want to try and correctly state information. So for the most part, we hope many of the statements people issue in giving information are true. But we always have to double check, because sometimes people themselves can be misleading and sometimes they're poorly informed. Okay, so informative statements. We are the 3rd planet from the sun. Correct information. We're the 10th planet. Well, there's not even 10. We're the 7th planet from the sun. Not correct, not true. But whether it's true or false, any attempt to provide a claim that has a truth value is informative use of language. Okay, so next there's also directive language, the directive function. And that recalls to mind our earlier lesson on what we call imperatives. If you remember, those are just commands. And so the directive function of language is to use imperatives to direct or influence behavior. Okay, so like if I say to you, write this down, then I'm giving you a directive. I'm giving you direction. I'm telling you, instructing you what to do. So that could be one use of directive language. If someone says, get out of the car, or hold the door, wait for me, I don't know, get away from me. You know, there's many different commands or directives that one can give to another person. That's another important major function within language. Not everything that you do or say has to do with trying to present information that someone's going to judge to be true or false. Sometimes you're just trying to get someone to do something or act a certain way. And so that is the directive function of language. But we've also got ceremonial function. So still under the same header, just to create a little room. Ceremonial function of language. The ceremonial function is basically language that is used in official or formal situations. Okay, so oftentimes this type of language use is set down by customary rules and expectations that everyone knows heading into the ceremonial event, whatever it is. So So maybe let's see if anyone has an idea about what might be an example of the ceremonial kind of language use. Who has a thought, guess, random idea about this? What could be a case of ceremonial language used in an official or a formal setting? Let's see if anyone has thoughts about that. Okay, so good already there, Margarito. Courtrooms and lawyers, yes. When you go into the court, you're not just freestyling your words and just making stuff up on the fly. I mean, you have a certain kind of formal set of rules according to which you address the court, the judge, the defendants, and whoever's being interviewed on the witness stand. So, you know, you could say, objection, Your Honor. That was not part of the prosecution's evidence that they filed in their docket. You know, this way of speaking is according to certain formal judicial procedures and rules. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor. Entering your plea could be another example. So courtrooms and law debate within the legal setting is certainly one example. Noah, you say debates. Sure, if there's like a formal debate between two sides, then we might have rules according to which one side gets a designated amount of time. They're expected to present facts and evidence concerning their side of the debate, and maybe there's also further rules and requirements on the manner of speech that they have to use in that case. So you say courtrooms, lawyers, debates, those are good. Anything else, guys? I got a few more I can just throw out there, but maybe someone else has another possible option to just discuss. Those are very good. What else? Anything? You know, imagine yourself like talking in a situation where it's like official, and it's not like talking to your friends or whatever. Job interviews, that could be a case perhaps. If there's a certain kind of expected routine, like for me, for example, when you interview for certain full-time professor positions, you have to give like a teaching sample, and you also sometimes have to answer interview questions that they give you in advance, so you have a little time to prepare. Wedding ceremonies would be another good example, correct? Yes. Do you take this person to love, honor, and obey till death do you part? I do, and so the proceedings, the speech acts of the person presiding over the ceremony and the members themselves, that could be another formal case of actual ceremonial language. Miranda rights and procedures for arrest and detention. You have the right to remain silent. Everything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. These are, of course, official statements that are given according to established legal rules of procedure. So that's another good case. Okay, so anyway, we all, I think, can understand that. One more category that is given in the book. In my view, this one was not as detailed definition as I would have liked. But anyway, here's what they gave: expressive function of language. So the expressive function is when you use language to basically convey attitudes, feelings, and emotions, or to bring an emotional impact about in the hearer or the person who sees the language use. So used to express feelings and emotions and bring about an emotional response in the hearer. Okay, I know it's a little illegible, but I'll read it and you'll hear me say it. Expressive function, used to express feelings and emotions and to bring about an emotional response. So think about here, like, for example, song lyrics or poetry. When you're hearing like a song, for example, the song isn't literally giving you information, like, here's some facts that you need to know. It's lyrics. It's not telling you to do anything. It's just, again, it's a song lyric. It's not official or ceremonial, of course, but what it might do is give you like the vibe of the song that the songwriter is trying to communicate or express. So if this is like an upbeat, happy song where the lyrics are all about like, I'm having my best life and everything's great, then that might rub off on you and you get a sense of the optimism and positivity behind the lyrics. If this is like a melancholy, sad song about a breakup or whatever, then that might come through in the way the lyrics are structured and expressed. Same with poetry, right? Not set to music, but just poetry on the page. You could read like one of the classic love sonnets of Shakespeare, and you might get a sense of the emotion and the bond of the characters referred to in the poem. But that's just trying to make you feel a certain type of way, to give you a sense of the emotional quality expressed in the piece of writing there. So the primary function of expressive language is to induce within the audience some types of feelings, whether those be happy, sad, angry, anxious, depressed, or anything in between. Okay, now they gave these as 4 functions of language. Of course, there's also inquiry. I wonder why that wasn't mentioned in the book, but of course, sometimes we use language to ask for information that we don't yet have. But limiting myself to the headings placed in the textbook, and we're just going to stick with these 4. So now you've heard them, you see the definitions, know a couple of examples. So we can go on from there. Okay, so next up, there's a little discussion in the book about the significance and the nature of nonverbal communication and nonverbal language. So I think that like this part of the notes is easier to sort of talk our way through rather than having a list of detailed definitions. So just try to follow some of this discussion. Sometimes nonverbal cues, like for example, our body language or tone of voice, can influence how people interpret what we are communicating. So sometimes it's not just what information you give across, but how you say it and how you present it. The same information presented in one tone of voice versus another can have a completely different reaction in the audience. And you sometimes want to think about how the information is going to be received by your audience so that you have the most productive communicative exchange with whoever it is. Also, setting aside tone of voice and body language, sometimes nonverbal cues that are, I guess, expressed through body language can influence and be used as a way of communicating. So, for example, sometimes body language can reinforce verbal communication. If you say yes to a person and you kind of nod while you do it, like, oh yeah, for sure, the act of nodding gives a further sense of affirmation to the statement that you're agreeing with or saying yes to. Isn't it a lot different when someone's like, oh yeah, than if they're like, oh yeah, and they're just kind of like staring, 1,000-yard stare with no verbal cues, or I should say non-verbal cues to reinforce the message. And as a professor, you really kind of hone in on how hand gestures and tone of voice can sometimes add emphasis and greater clarity to the things that you're trying to express in a lecture. And it's not just for professors and teachers, though. In everyday life, whatever circumstances you're in, you want to sometimes be a skilled communicator, and knowing how your nonverbal communication can assist in that is a good thing. Another case of nonverbal communication reinforcing your verbal message is like when you gesture towards something as you mention it. Like if I say, notice over here this can of whatever sparkling water. I look at it, I point towards it, and I draw your attention towards it. If I had just said, please look to the speaker's left and notice this can of whatever sparkling water, without gesturing at it, pointing towards it or something else, it really doesn't come across in the same kind of effective way. In other cases, though, body language can betray our intentions, so know about that as well. Sometimes you've heard people say that there are telltale signs that can be detected by a skilled observer of when a person is being deceptive or when they're trying to hide something. So I've heard that, and I think it's true. Like if a person is trying to conceal facts from someone else, then they often won't speak in an even tone of voice, or they will fail to maintain eye contact, or they will shift their gaze around as though they're thinking for the next thing to say. So I've heard it said that lawyers, police officers are sometimes highly skilled in the ability to detect signs of dishonesty or deception. So sometimes you got to make sure that if that's your goal anyway, I hope that you don't ever want to do anything bad in terms of deception. But if you're trying to withhold on information from someone, then you also got to consider how your body language might be giving you away. Another example of nonverbal language and communication is the use of images and pictures to convey content. And you've probably heard the saying that pictures can tell 1,000 words. I think there's probably actually some truth to that, right? So think of, hearing about a terrible natural disaster in some part of the world, but it's just a written account, and they just describe it on the page in writing, like, oh, families were displaced, whole homes were just leveled by the force of the earthquake. Now people are in bread lines, and it's going to be a while before we can get even water and electricity running again. If you just read that, you might have a sense of concern for the people involved. It might hit you like that, but don't you think it would hit a lot different and be more forceful? You would understand it better if you actually could see image or video of the same thing, right? So that's why, like on a newspaper, they're going to place a prominent headline image on the cover so that you get a sense of the story visually and not just in terms of linguistic communication. So pictures can sometimes express something in a way more quickly and more forcefully than even a very detailed written account could. You could be the best writer ever, going to great detailed lengths to express the pain and misery of the situation, but just looking at an image could perhaps do more to convey the same idea or situation. And I would say this, you guys in this current generation are perhaps some of the most skilled ever in history at using images to help facilitate better communication, right? Think of memes, think of, internet culture, where sometimes just a single image becomes so resonant that people all know the significance of it, even though it's perhaps been used a bunch of different times and just slightly modified in each case. So the use of like memes, videos, pictures that are posted online is another effective tool for communication. And I think bringing that into your everyday lives and even in your professional lives is a great skill that you guys are going to have probably in a greater degree of facility than like previous generations, your parents and grandparents. Okay, so just be mindful of how these nonverbal cues, images, etc., can influence how other people are interpreting you. Always try to be clear, and remember that language is a two-way street. So sometimes listening to the other party, you have to be willing to do things like ask follow-up questions, ask for clarification, because often, you know, if you're not paying close attention to what someone else says, you might miss some of the important details. And then it kind of defeats the whole purpose of having a communication exchange, right? Why talk or exchange messages with people if you're really not paying attention to what the other person is saying? Then you might as well just be talking to yourself, right? So try your best to have a meeting of the minds and just listen carefully to others as well as expressing yourself thoroughly and well. So I guess the next thing we'll talk about here are what are some different types of definitions and what are different types of meaning, okay? So let's go into that. First of all, two types of meaning. So they say in language that there is both connotative and denotative meaning of words and concepts. So denotative meaning versus connotative. Okay, so first of all, the denotative kind of meaning behind words is when you just express the basic features of the object without any attempt to involve slang or a non-literal assessment of the word's meaning. So it's like expressing the essential attributes of an object like a basic dictionary definition, okay? Okay, like a standard dictionary definition. So like the denotative meaning of a term is its like official meaning, as you would see in the dictionary. Before I give examples, let me give the other, address the definition of connotative meaning, and then we'll be able to compare the examples against each other. So connotative meaning is different here because with connotative meaning, this is not literal dictionary definition. This is meaning that is based on past experience and associations, and because of that, they say it can be either positive or negative. So let me write that here. Okay, guys, so connotative meaning. Meaning that is based on past experience and associations and could be either positive or negative. So let me give you an example of a single word where we can inquire into its denotative versus its connotative meaning. Okay, so like, for example, the word dog. What's the denotative meaning of dog? Well, it would be a member of the mammalian classification of canine. So, you know, Canis familiaris is the Latin term. And so all members of that phylogenetic category on the tree of life are dogs. We could say a little bit more about their standard physiology and characteristic features, but that's the official meaning. You know, a member of the family Canis familiaris in the mammalian tree of life. But in the connotative sense, the same word dog could be used as a slang term with either a positive or a negative connotation. So maybe you've heard someone say like, yeah, I'm just chilling with my dogs or whatever, right? Like in that case, unless the person's trying to make a funny joke and they're literally hanging out with canines, it's often given as like a warm and friendly reference to one's friends, right? And in that case, you're drawing on the past experience and associations of the loyalty and companionship that dogs provide. So these are my dogs in the sense, kind of like, you know, how real dogs are, these companionable, companion pet animals. On the other hand, sometimes you've heard someone say, you know, I just can't trust this guy because men are dogs, something like that. I'm not, you know, endorsing this statement or anything, but you've heard people say this perhaps. And in that case, you're drawing on negative past experiences and associations with the same word, like the nature of the animal being bestial and only looking for the most immediate gratification and so on. So when you're trying to evoke the resonance of those associations with dog, you might use it in that meaning with that connotation, okay? And we could just example other cases like this. I don't know, the word cool, if you looked it up in the dictionary, I mean, its primary meaning would have to do with the temperature condition of like an environment or a room or whatever. It's cool there, it's meaning it's kind of cold. But the same thing, of course, you know, cool could be a positive connotative meaning if you're talking about, you know, one of those laid back hip people that everyone wants to be friends with. Or you could say, I got a really cool reception at the job interview. I don't think these people liked me. In that sense, you're trading on the association of cool with coldness and being, you know, not in a place of warmth. So just understand that a given word can convey a number of different possible meanings. When we're speaking officially and, you know, scientifically and formally, we often use the denotative meaning of words, but in casual speech, slang, informal contexts, sometimes we use a word in its connotative sense. Even a word like home, right? I mean, if you looked it up in the dictionary, it would probably say something like a location where a person resides. But then if you use this is my home, like in an informal, everyday sense, it might carry with it like all the warmth and memories of one's childhood and formative experiences. So just a little bit on that, and maybe I can read from the book to sort of close the discussion here on denotation and connotation. Words have both denotative and connotative meanings. The denotative meaning of a word or phrase expresses the properties of the object, being, or event that the word is symbolizing. It is the same as its dictionary definition. For example, the denotative meaning of the word dog is a domesticated member of the species Canis familiaris. Any being that has these properties is a dog by definition. The connotative meaning of a word or phrase includes feelings and personal thoughts that are elicited based on past experience and associations. The word dog may elicit thoughts of a loyal pet, or at the opposite extreme, something that is worthless or of poor quality, a despicable person, or an ugly person. The connotative meanings of a term may be included in a list of dictionary definitions, or may simply be shared among a specific group of people. So like, you know how when you look up a definition of a word in the dictionary, if you ever do that, oftentimes you'll see that there's a primary definition listed as its initial entry. And then if you go down, you'll see like secondary, tertiary, and other definitions that are less prominent involving the same piece of language. So sometimes you'll find the connotative meanings of these words as you go a little bit further down the list of possible secondary and etc. meanings of a given word. So we're not saying that the connotative meaning cannot appear in a dictionary. It's just that it's not to be taken as its primary meaning in its original sense, okay? So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Can anybody else think of a word that has like a literal official meaning, but then it's also used as slang? Let me see if anybody has something like that. I know you guys, I mean, I'm assuming, right? Young people, you guys are the masters of all things slang, lingo, etc. So maybe you have something you could throw in the chat. I'm asking for a word that means one thing in one setting, but then it could also mean something like informal in a different setting. Lit, okay, that's a good one, Micah. Yeah, so lit, I mean, I guess what's the denotative meaning of lit? To ignite something by combustion, like lighting a match. But, you know, say, oh, I'm lit, or this situation is lit, this class is lit, whatever. You guys know these words in that context is connotative, and I guess it refers to enjoying it being exciting. It's like, it's, you know, it's a fun experience, whatever. Bad, okay, yeah, so bad, like gas, that's funny, like marijuana versus, I don't know, like a gasoline, or like actual gas, like in the air. Cap, like like no cap, like, right, like I'm not playing around, this is legitimate, I'm speaking the truth, as opposed to like a cap on your head. Dope. What's the denotative meaning of dope? I guess one meaning of it is a person with inferior intelligence. This person's a dope, but of course, dope in the connotative sense refers to something being awesome and cool. Drip, yeah, with your clothes, you know, like you're wearing a really cool fit. But of course, the denotative meaning of the same is something that's leaking like off of a faucet, perhaps. Sick, sure. Sick in its denotative sense is not a good thing. You're feeling ill, you're not well. But if you saw like a sick movie or, you know, you heard a sick song or something, you might be like, that was a cool song. Zaza, okay, Diego, we're getting really deep into the weeds of denotative and connotative meaning. But yeah, you guys understand that there's a lot of possible examples that I could have used in giving this lecture here. But I kind of just used some of the ones that were included in the textbook to make it easy. Okay, so guys, thanks for the little bit of help on that one. What we're going to talk about next are different types of definitions. So there's a mention here of like different types of meaning, and then the textbook does discuss, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4 different types of definitions too, okay? Okay, yeah, so cool. 4 types of definitions. Okay, so on the one hand, we've got, as it's labeled in the textbook, stipulative definitions. Okay, now a stipulative definition is just a definition that's given to new terms that emerge within our language. So, okay, now one thing that's interesting about language is that if you study the history of any language, just think of, you know, English, for example, you notice that the way people talk and write in English, even like a couple generations ago, is a lot different from the way people happen to talk or write nowadays using the same exact language. So, I mean, some of you guys maybe ever tried to read some Shakespeare, right? It's extremely formal, the old Elizabethan mode of speech. If you go even further back, some of you guys might have read the Canterbury Tales, which was written in, I mean, it's very archaic. It's technically English, but it's almost like Middle English. You know, one that thrill with the shore sort, the drought of March had to perse to the road. I mean, that's like when the drought of March, when that April with his sweet showers has pierced the drought of March to the root. And, you know, it just sounds a lot different, but language evolves is what I'm trying to say. Words that used to be common and customary have fallen out of everyday usage, and new words appear that were not in existence in the past. So the way that you're talking, if you could take a time machine back to the time of Shakespeare, speaking English to other English speakers then, it would be quite awkward, right? Even though it is the same language, because many of the words that were conventional and in use back then are not so common anymore. And now we have some words that didn't ever exist back then. So stipulative definitions are just definitions that are assigned to new terms that pop up and emerge within our language. Can anybody think of a word or phrase that didn't have any meaning like 100 years ago, maybe because it refers to a type of technology or social phenomena that didn't exist back then? I've got a lot of examples of this, but maybe you've got something that you can put in the same chat here. I'm just talking about new words, words that your great-grandparents never used. Feminism. Okay, yeah, sure. Margarito says feminism, although I'm not 100% sure I can validate that because I'm not there. I took a history of feminism class in college a long time ago in my senior year, and I think that there were some historical forebears of modern day feminism. You had the women's suffrage movement, right, back in the 19th century, in the early 20th century. So yes, though, if you do go back far enough, there's no mention of feminism in like the early annals of Western history. Poggers, yeah, there you go, another a new trend that didn't exist back then. And all kinds of technology, even if I say internet or World Wide Web, YouTuber, correct. Yeah, these are words that have no meaning and no reference in a world where the internet doesn't exist yet. Sometimes they have to do with brand names and stuff. Cryptocurrency, sure. Yeah, there was no such thing as cryptocurrency even a couple generations ago. So that's another good example. Let's see, as I'm looking through the book. Definitions are only one. Okay, so stipulative precise. A stipulative definition is one given to a new term, such as bytes, like gigabytes or whatever, bytes of data. This is something that doesn't have any meaning until the era of computing. Decaf, I guess decaffeinated coffee is something that didn't exist prior to modern methods of being able to remove the caffeine from the coffee beans. Skyscraper, laptop, right? New forms of technology or architectural design. The word laptop or skyscraper means nothing to a person living in the year 1700. They also say a stipulative definition may also be a new definition of an existing word, such as the addition of heterosexual to the definitions of the term straight, right? The word straight didn't carry this meaning until there was something more widespread in society to compare it against. Yeah, so anyway, it says stipulative definitions often start off as jargon or slang and are initially limited to a particular group of people. As such, over time, they get introduced into the lexicon. So you guys know that every year, new words are added to the official, like Webster's English Dictionary, Oxford English Dictionary. And so words that appear for the first time there, they would also kind of fit the category of what we're talking about, these stipulative definitions. Okay, so when a new word appears, you got to stipulate what it means to the audience and the community of speakers. Okay, so they often start as jargon or slang. And you know, it's true that words like, this is referenced in the book as well, date rape, sexual harassment, these didn't really have any stable meaning until the women's movement and the feminist movement of the 70s. So there's a fair point, really, that you are making there, Margarito, I would say. Anyway, we continue from here. So stipulative definitions. Next up, let's talk about theoretical definitions. So theoretical definitions, this is pretty straightforward. These are just the definition of scientific terms. So to explain the nature of scientific terms. Yeah, so theoretical definitions, suppose that you're interested in precise concepts in science like, oh, Sky, you say philosophy as an example of a stipulative definition. I can't agree with that one, because philosophy as it is practiced has existed for thousands and thousands of years, all the way back to the earliest written materials that we've been able to recover. So it's not been stipulated recently, so it's a very old word. I think it's better to think of words that are on the cutting edge, current day, like new terms in the vocabulary. But back to this, theoretical definition. So to explain the nature of scientific terms, precise scientific concepts, gravity, force, mass, acceleration, inertia, entropy. These words have specific meanings that you would find in like a scientific textbook or a course of study in some field of science, right? So, of course, we sometimes have to think about the most precise levels of description when we're doing scientific research or when we're investigating scientific claims. So another category of definition that belongs to the realm of science. They're called theoretical definitions because they often involve theories that have been widely accepted in the scientific field. Okay, so I say 4 types of definitions. Here's 2 of them. I guess I'll erase to create some more room. Okay, so next we have operational definitions. Okay, so operational definitions. These are definitions that involve the use of a boundary or a threshold to create standardization. So Okay, so the operational definition, and I'll give you some examples of that, and then maybe you can even throw some out there also. Sometimes we need to make sure that everybody is using, oh wait, Sky, let me make sure I'm understanding what you're writing there. It is a philosophical course, true, but what I'm saying is that the word itself, philosophy, is not a newly invented term. This is a word that has an ancient history, so if what we were just now discussing were stipulative definitions of new words, then philosophy wouldn't count as one of those. It is a philosophy course, yes, but what we're talking about here are the classification of certain words. So I'm sorry if I didn't catch your comment in the right way. Maybe you intended to say that philosophy is a scientific term under the theoretical definition heading, but science and philosophy are different fields, so that would be another point where I would have to correct it, I guess. But not to worry, I appreciate all comments, so not to worry, Sky. Operational definition, using a boundary or threshold to create standardization. So sometimes we might use a word with no, oh good, not to worry. Well, you'll see the beginning later on when you watch the replay, Sky. It's all good, it's good. Yeah, sometimes people use a word with a whole variety of individual interpretations, but sometimes we need to set down the meaning of the word so that everyone uses it with the same understanding. So like, for example, what is the operational definition of being too drunk to drive, right? What's the limit line according to which, under the law, we operationally define the person as, beyond this, they're considered too drunk for the purposes of the law to drive? You know the threshold I'm talking about, let me know. That's the question on the table right now. What limitation in terms of above this threshold one's considered to be under the influence? I mean, you guys, many of you probably do drive, so I'm thinking you probably know this. But even if you don't, I think you'd know it anyway. So go ahead, tell me. Too drunk to drive, what's the level? What's the limit? Yeah, it is. That's right, Nick. It's 0.08 blood alcohol content. Now, so like driving under the influence with respect to alcohol. Now, could we have said a higher or lower number? Yeah, I mean, as a society, I guess we could have agreed to make it 0.09 or 0.07. But we can't have different standards for each citizen, so we have to have one uniform standard that everyone can be held accountable to in common. Are there people who say at 0.08, I'm not even feeling anything because I got such a high tolerance? Yes. Are there other people who say, oh, I'm such a lightweight, even if I'm at 0.04, I feel like I can't walk? Yes. But we can't say that how we legally define driving under the influence depends on the feelings and attitudes of each individual. So we have a common standard. We impose this boundary above which we designate you as too drunk to drive, below which we say not. Okay, sorry. Can you think of any other concepts that we operationally define in the same way? So one is driving under the influence. That's operationally defined as 0.08 or above. While you're thinking of my question, I'll give you some others along the same lines. What about the definition of obesity, right? Does anybody know the precise metric that we use? There's a numeric value that is used to determine whether a person is obese. It's whether they're above or below a certain number in what scale. Does anybody know this fact? How obesity is medically defined? There's a certain numeric value. It is BMI, that's right, Micah. So BMI means body mass index, okay? So it's a body mass index. That's a number that can easily be calculated by plugging in your height, weight, and gender into a BMI calculator. Now, medically anyway, we say that a person has obesity or they are in the condition of being obese if they have a BMI over a certain numerical threshold. Now, are there some people who say, I'm above that number, but I feel like that's just my natural body weight, and there's some people that are below it and they're like obsessed with being too thin and they think they're already too big? Sure, but medically anyway, we have to have a uniform standard of definition. So we operationally define obesity through the BMI number. So obesity via BMI, driving under the influence under the blood alcohol content metric, Diego, you say tax brackets. That's another good one. Yeah. So what is the threshold above which a person is considered to be in a given tax bracket? Well, we have to operationally define that as well. Some people might say, I feel really wealthy just because I've got friends. Another person may say, I've got all the money in the world, but I still feel poor. So with wealth, there's actually another number. You referred to tax brackets, Diego, but have you heard of the poverty line? That's also an operationally defined concept. So poverty would be one. The poverty line is a certain net amount of annual income above which a person is defined as no longer being in poverty. So there's a federal poverty line and there's a state of California poverty line as well. If your annual income comes in lower than this level, then we operationally say this person is defined as being in poverty. And above that number, the person is not defined as being in poverty, even though individual circumstances may dictate that they feel more or less poor than their placement along the scale. Yeah, and so you say poverty, obesity, DUI. Let me think. Oh, how about this? What's the level of age that a person must have to be an adult in our system, in our society, in our laws? You're an adult once you cross what threshold? The age threshold, which I guess every one of you guys knows for sure. I'm hinting at what? 18. Yes, very good. Now, so once you're 18, we just say that's an adult right there. Are there some people that are, much older than 18 that say, I feel like I'm still an immature child? And there are some very precocious and wise teenagers that are younger than 18 that say, I'm much more mature and adult-like than some of my parents and teachers. Yes, but for the purposes of the law, we can't say it's all how you feel. And one person's an adult at 16 and another person's an adult at 25. I mean, that might be how they are developmentally. But for the purposes of defining adulthood, we have to have a common standard. And so that, again, would be an operational definition, adulthood. Could we have decided to make it 17? Or could we have decided to make it 19? Sure. But whatever standard is determined is the operational definition. Well, 16, Sky, I don't know, maybe is the age of consent in certain states. So like it's possible for a person to not be held accountable for statutory rape or something if they had sex with a person of that age or above. In some states, of course, well, in our state and I think most all the others, you can drive at 16, but you can't vote, serve in the military, and a whole host of other functions of adult life. Yeah, the drinking age would be another good one, Jasmine, yes. So drinking age is 21 and over. Even though some people feel perhaps that they're not capable of handling alcohol, even when they're older, and some people feel like experienced drinkers by the time they finish high school. So we still have a drinking age, though, and that's the legal line. Okay, well, we're running low on time, and we're going to continue going through Chapter 3 on Wednesday, so we're making good progress. Maybe I'll close with a quick reference to the textbook on this operational definition stuff. It says, an operational definition is a concise definition of a measure used to provide standardization. The lexical definition of obese, very fat or overweight, is not precise enough for a physician to determine if a person's weight is a health risk. Instead, the medical profession defines obesity operationally in terms of body mass index or BMI. And then they also refer to the poverty threshold, and so they give some other examples there too. All right, guys, well, good meeting, everyone, all around. We're going to just pick up here next time where we left off and finish Chapter 3. And from there, we'll begin Chapter 4 next week as we get prepared for the midterm. To anybody who arrived a moment later, not to worry. I was just saying that I did finish grading the first homework a while back. Anyone who still wants their grade for this, simply send me an email anytime, and I'll be able to reply back to you within 48 hours. What book are you talking about, Sky? The textbook for the class. I mean, think. 5th edition, the book. I mean, that's the book. So yeah, I finished the first homework a week or so ago. Anybody that wants to score on that would have to email me. I just reply to individual email requests for assignment grades. And I'm finishing the grading of the first quiz. That'll take me a couple more days, and I'll be in touch with you as soon as it's all done. Okay. Well, thanks so much, everybody. Have a good one, and I'll see you guys then next time, all right? Take it easy. Everyone's good? Let me see you in the chat one time. Thanks again. Okay, bye-bye. See y'all.